I guess until I sat down and wrote the book, I didn't really realize how all these different stories that I touch on in the introduction in chapter 1 of the book, how they really did form who I've become as a photographer and particularly as a conservation advocate.
This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife lovers and animal advocates, presented by the Fur Bears. We're only a week away from the first Defender Radio Family Christmas special, and to get everyone in the festive mood, I'm giving away a wonderful gift with this week's episode. John Marriott's new book, Tall Tales and Long Lenses, is the subject of my interview with him, and we have a signed copy of the book waiting to go out to your home. All you have to do for your chance to win is sign up for Defender Radio email updates. That's it. Just go to thefurbears.com/updates, fill in your info, opt in to receive the weekly e-news as well as Defender Radio updates, and you'll be in the draw. Links to this are available on this week's Defender Radio blog and across social media channels. Again, just visit thefurbears.com/updates, opt in to receive both emails, and you'll be entered to win. The draw will take place at the end of the week to ensure delivery by Christmas. John Marriott is a wonderful wildlife photographer. I've had the good fortune to chat with him in the past about his work, particularly on the subjects of ethics and advocacy. When I saw the news that he'd released a new book, I immediately tweeted him, asking for a review copy and an interview. Then I emailed him, and to be honest, I think I might have called his house at 3 a.m. once or twice. But long story short, I loved the book. I wrote a review of Tall Tales, Long Lenses, My Adventures in Photography, for the Fur Bears, and managed to tie down John for an interview between his numerous signings and speaking engagements in recent weeks. We discussed the process of developing this new book, what it was like to invite readers into his memories and life, and why one of Canada's most popular wildlife photographers is also one of Canada's most outspoken conservationists. We'll get to the interview after this brief message from our supporters. Looking for a parka that'll keep you warm in Canada's extreme winters and not harm the animals? Check out Woolly Outerwear, a Toronto-based, made-in-Canada ethical company that utilizes military-grade technology to keep you warm and help save the lives of animals. Portions of every sale go to support the Fur Bears and Animal Sanctuary. I embrace my wild side by wearing Woolly, and you can too. Learn about their commitments to the environment, the animals, and the people they work with, as well as how to buy at woolyouterwear.com or anywhere on social media. What was the inspiration for doing this book with these stories? Because doing a book is not a new concept for you, but this format feels new.
Yeah, I'd done quite a few different coffee table photography books in the past, 5 different ones actually beforehand, and this one I really wanted to be more of a storytelling type of book. So it still is a coffee table photography book. There's still 150 gorgeous big full color photographs in it. But there's also a considerable amount of text and sort of stories behind the photos and stories of what led to the photos, and even stories about some of the characters in the book. There's probably 11 or 12 different characters that I cover in the book. They're ranging from Delinda the wolf to Frank the tank, the grizzly bear, and even including a human character, Trapper Ivan from the Yukon.
Mm-hmm. And you make a note relatively early on that you wanted to do this in chronological order, and we'll get to some of the stories in a minute. But what was the desire to do it in this format? Because it reads almost like an autobiography in many ways.
Yeah, and it does read a bit like an autobiography. I think the chronological part of it was because, so let me just back up a little bit and tell you a bit of the impetus behind doing the book itself, and why I chose 2017 to do it. So there's sort of 2 key reasons. And number one is I made my first sale as a professional photographer to Canadian Geographic in January of 1997. So this was the 20-year anniversary of my first sale as a pro. And so that was one of the things that played a key role in this. And then the other one was back in 2003, I did this trip up to the Yukon and had all kinds of crazy adventures over a month-long period up there. And during that trip, I was emailing my friends back in Banff and Canmore, in Alberta in the Canadian Rockies, emailing them with all these anecdotes and, what was going on and these crazy tales. And I got back and sat down with a couple of friends, a couple of girlfriends, and we were sitting in a pub, and they said, let's see these pictures of this trapper Ivan and this midnight shootout and all this crazy stuff that happened to you. And I kind of looked at them blankly and said, well, I don't have photos of that stuff. I was busy chatting away to these people or taking part in these adventures. So I kind of realized, I missed this whole opportunity to pass along some of this stuff. And one of the girls said, you got to start documenting this stuff. You got to write a book about this. And I joked to her, I'll call it Tall Tales, Long Lenses. And she said, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Write that down. And so that was all the way back in 2003. And that was really, the idea started ruminating in my brain right then and there. And it took me till this sort of 20-year anniversary before I thought, you know what? I've got this perfect collection of chronological tales with all these different photographs that go together that would make a great book that would not only have people, popping it open and going, oh, wow, look at the pretty pictures, but would also read it and go, wow, that's really cool stories. That's interesting storytelling. And so that was my goal with the book, and choosing to do it this year and choosing to do it chronologically.
I definitely think that you accomplished those goals in reading. I mean, when I got my review copy, reading through it, it reminded me of reading some of like Roy McGregor's old stuff. He's, I believe, with the Globe and Mail now, or the National, I don't remember.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Roy's with the Globe and Mail. Yeah, that's a huge compliment, considering that I think Roy has won a number of awards in Canada for his wilderness writing. So
it definitely has the same feel, though, a very personal, reflective, but always sort of with a purpose behind the story. It's never just here's a pretty picture. There's a story behind it, and I don't want to go into the stories too much because that's half the fun of this book. But one of the early ones, you talk about, you were fishing with your family, with your brother and your dad. You thought you saw a Sasquatch footprint, which comes up a lot. We're going to have a talk about that, which turned out to be a grizzly bear footprint. And you note that that's when life took on a new course. What was it like retrospectively looking back at some of these moments and sort of realizing how they helped define the direction in which you went?
Yeah, it was very interesting looking back at them, because I guess until I sat down and wrote the book, I didn't really realize how everything, all these different stories that I touch on in the introduction in chapter 1 of the book, how they really did form who I've become as a photographer and particularly as a conservation advocate. And so I can literally see it, and people will read it as they read through chronologically through these different little stories and see these little pictures from my childhood, and read about the old photo album that I used to keep with my Kodak Instamatic, firing away all these award-winning shots that were not award-winning at all. and then stories like, the Sasquatch from Scotch Creek, and, talking about how that led to my fascination with big male grizzly bears, and my fight to shut down the trophy hunt of them in Western Canada.
You have a lot of incredible tales of the iconic Canadian wildlife that you're known for taking photos of, like grizzly bears and wolves, and there's a couple of beautiful caribou herds. One of the things I really enjoyed is you've got one chapter where you talk about a wolverine encounter, but you also talk about having these gorgeous photos of a marten, who I think are a very underappreciated fur bearer in Canada. What was the importance for you, both in including that diversity in the book, as well as in your photography when you're out and about?
Well, I definitely wanted with the book and with my portfolio as a professional photographer to not just be known for bears and wolves. Mm-hmm. And so very specifically in the book, there were stories that I knew had been captivating to people on my website back in the day and things like that. So I knew my pine marten story and photographs would capture people's attention. I knew that I had some owl and caribou shots and stories from the north that would include photographs of a wolverine, of things that are just a little bit different than my usual bears and wolves that I'm most known for. And I think even people that get a chance to hear me speak at some point about the book will even hear even more tales where I talk about, how I got some of my prairie shots and stuff that didn't necessarily make it into the book. But the book itself, it does carry a pretty broad range of different animals and characters, like I mentioned, and I did that very much on purpose. I wanted it to sort of, have a broader scope and touch on a number of different issues, touch on a number of different stories, and just be overall, I really wanted to be entertaining for people. And I think I've accomplished that.
When you were preparing the book for publishing, I remember I follow you on Facebook. You're John E. Photography. Oh, I can't. What is it? There's an
Johnny Marriott Wildlife and Nature Photography. Yeah.
And I followed that, and you were doing sort of a voting on covers. And it was really neat how you kind of went about doing it. Why did you decide to sort of take it to the people to get opinions on the
great point. So I had picked out what I thought wanted to be the cover, and that was Frank the Tank, and people will be able to see it on your website there or on my website. A big sort of menacing, snarling-looking grizzly bear that I came to know quite well. And that's what I wanted to be on the cover, but I sort of thought at the last second, maybe I better just check some of my other really well-known photographs and sort of test them out and see if maybe I'm wrong in my assumption that Frank the Tank should be the cover. And so I decided to do this online voting contest after I'd run sort of some of these options by a few friends and my graphic designer and stuff, and sort of pitted some of my most famous photographs head to head. Fluff Up, which is a raven that placed me in the 2012 International Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. I placed Fluff Up against Delinda the wolf and against Casper the friendly bear, and pitted those guys against each other on an online cover battle, and then took the winner of that, which was Casper the friendly bear, and pitted Casper against Frank the Tank, and 2,600 people voted online between Facebook and Instagram. So it was quite a big turnout, and thankfully for me, Frank the Tank won very narrowly. Actually, when I first put them online, the first couple hours, Casper was winning, and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, am I going to have to lie to everybody and tell them that Frank the Tank won? But thankfully, Frank did pull it out in the end. So that, I was able to go with the image that I wanted to go with. And then I won't give away why I so badly wanted to go with that image of Frank, but it is described in the book, particularly in the final couple of chapters, as to sort of this misconception that's out there about grizzly bears and how I touch on it and describe my own feelings towards Frank and other big male grizzly bears like him.
There's an interesting note to readers, and this is not uncommon, I found, in photography books, to say, this is the process, and it's very, very brief. And it's I think, only 2 paragraphs long. But there's 3 things you hit on, and I kind of wanted to hear a bit about each of them. One is that you're intentionally vague with locations, in that you're not going to say exactly where some of these animals were found. And I've heard this from other, tour operators and photographers. Is that a real issue, especially out west where a lot of this takes place?
Yeah, it definitely is a real issue. I find that if photographers are posting actual locations, so say they find an owl somewhere and post a location or post the GPS coordinates, within a day or two, there might be 20 photographers there. And wow. I just cannot contribute to that. And so I am extremely vague about locations. And even on Facebook and Instagram, I very, very rarely put a real location or put any location at all. I'll just be extremely vague and say Alberta or the Canadian Rockies, or often I do not post stuff that's current because I don't want people to necessarily know what I'm up to. I have people that sometimes follow me. It sounds ridiculous, but I will have cars that recognize my car and they'll pull in behind and say, "Oh, let's go see what John Marriott's going to find." And so I'm pretty careful when I'm out there as to what I'm doing, and definitely with locations, keep it as vague as possible.
You also note that you don't bait, and you and I have had a very large conversation about this, but I thought we could have a very, very brief conversation about it for this one. Why for you is not baiting and making sure that you're taking these photos in their natural element so important?
I just think that as a photographer, there are so many people getting into wildlife photography right now that if everyone is out there and manipulating animals' behaviors just so they can get a photograph, that is extremely selfish. And I just think it's selfish behavior on part of the photographer. And it is also causing the animal to not act in a natural manner. So, I mean, we're already causing the animal potentially to not act in a natural manner just by our presence alone, although I try and mitigate that as much as possible using camo and staying downwind and things like that. But there's no doubt that just being there has an effect on animals. And so I want to minimize every other effect that I have on that animal. And if I were baiting or calling or trying to lure an animal in to do something, I'm then changing its behavior. And to me, it's much more rewarding as a wildlife photographer to just be patient and wait for some natural behavior to unfold. And that's what I'm after when I'm out there taking pictures.
I think that's also interesting because it plays into the other point you have in that paragraph that I want to talk about, and that's your editing process. I think my first exposure to this as a concept came when I worked in a newspaper and we would do photo editing. And the concept of only editing to make sure it prints well, especially with newsprint, as you know, it can be often very muddy.
Yes.
But this comes up a lot with photographers, I think, for pets. We frequently see it. And I've got a lot of friends who do pet photography. And that is the concept of, well, I like the way the dog looks in this picture, but the background in that picture a bit better.
Right.
Or the tails looks funny in this one, but the tail looks right in that one. So they'll literally remove the tail from one photo and add the tail from the other. But you make a note that you do minimal editing on your photos. Why, for you, is that an important part of this?
I just find that it's sort of like the whole baiting thing and everything. I prefer to things be natural as to what I actually captured. And there may be the odd little thing that I'll remove here or there, but by and large, I just don't touch photos at all other than quickly doing color corrections on them and then a bit of sharpening, and that's it. And then move on and let it be printed as it was. So people looking through the book, if they're, extremely critical about little twigs being in the way or this or that, I don't remove any of those. Mm-hmm. So that's just the way the photograph was. And, I prefer to keep it that way for the most part.
It's always fun, though, to try and completely redo a photo that way. That's what I do because I'm not a very good photographer. But now, one question that came in from Marcy Potter, who works in the Fur Bear's office, was what your favorite photo is of all time, gun to your head. Because you'll post one of your favorite photos or one of your favorite photos from a certain, event or a certain trip. But do you have a single photo that you would say above all others that you've taken is the one that stands out?
Yeah, sorry, I got somebody at the front door there.
No problem.
Okay, so let's repeat that question again. Sorry.
Yeah, it's gun to your head. What would your favorite photo be that you've taken? Because you'll post that this is one of your favorite photos or a favorite photo from a particular trip.
I don't know if I necessarily have an all-time favorite photo. I've got, as you alluded to, a number that I will say are favorites. For a long time, my favorite photo was actually one that I've never published and probably never will, and that's because it's of a dead elk that's frozen in ice.
Oh, wow.
With its teeth bared and, its head's kind of sticking up from the ice, and you can see the antlers and stuff. But it was a photo I took back when I was first starting in photography, and I've always just loved the raw emotion of it. But it's not exactly one that's going to be popular on Facebook or Instagram or anything or in a book. So it's kind of, I've kept it to myself, and other than describing it to you, it will probably never see the light of day. But that's the kind of photo that to me often, makes me remember things. And I know there's another photo that's part of one of the stories in the book, although the photo itself did not make it into the book. And it's a pine marten crunching onto the skull of a vole. And not a great photo technically or anything, but I can actually still remember the crunch.
Yep.
And so to me, that's a photo that I've always loved, and because it just brings back so many memories to me. So my favorites, I guess, are ones that, maybe aren't my best shots. They're ones that instead evoke some sort of memory with me.
And, that's interesting because I did a bit of photography when I worked with a newspaper, because that's sort of just the nature of that level of journalism at the time. As you would be, I'm your new reporter, and they say, okay, here's your camera. You're also our new photographer. But there's times when I'll have, like a Facebook memory or something pop up, and it's a picture from a crime scene or a collision or something, and it's a very standard picture. And then I remember the actual picture that I took and we didn't publish. And it's the hand that's fallen out from under a blanket on a gurney. And it's not something you would ever publish, and it's a horribly depressing photo, but it just elicits that whole range of emotions I felt in the moment too. So I kind of get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah.
The power of that kind of a photo, especially to the person who was there, even though it may not be popular with others.
Yeah.
But talking about the book, what really comes across, and I've had a few conversations with you, and I've gotten this, but reading it in the book, it really is present, is the growth of you as an advocate and it started early, which is sort of the fun part of it. But throughout the book, as you tell some of these stories, the very real frustration and anger and sadness with what you've seen while out trying to capture beautiful photos, or what you've learned about the way an animal ended up being treated or died, is very, very apparent. Was that part of the intent to show that side of yourself in a very real and raw way?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it's the intent, but it's the way the book is constructed and everything, and the way that I am as a photographer and as an advocate, it was just a natural part of the story. And each little story along the way continues to lend to that. And like you say, there's continued little, I wouldn't call them messages, but there's just little hints and sadness is brought up, like you mentioned, and disgust and anger at how wildlife is managed and things like that. But it's an overarching theme in the book as opposed to being the central theme. The central theme is still, I wanted it to be an entertaining book for people and a storytelling book, and then have this as sort of this underlying current that runs throughout the book. And like you said, it is chronological. I did start at a very young age, and to me, there's two things that are important to me about photography, and one is making sure that I can pay my bills, so that I have to make a living at it as my job. But the second thing is, continuing the passion that I have for helping wildlife, and being an advocate for these species that don't have a voice on their own.
And I want to be very clear. This book has some of that frustration and anger and sadness, but it also certainly has the excitement and the beauty and the joy, which I think it's wonderful that you've balanced those. So we see you as the advocate of being frustrated and, as I said, angry and sad, but then just the pleasure at seeing some beautiful things, at being a part of something wonderful. When you look at the book, do you get both of those emotions? Like, do you feel that? I mean, obviously you're going to feel pride in a wonderful accomplishment with the book itself, but in looking at the stories and the photos, are you able to sort of navigate through it and feel and remember those ups and downs?
Yeah, for sure. And I think even people that pop open the book and just look at the photographs without even reading the stories will even get a hint of, because not all the photos are the big, glorious, beautiful, uplifting ones. Certainly there's a lot of those that I'm very, very proud of to have in the book and that, really are eye-catching. But there's also a few mixed in there, like the Inuit hunter with the grizzly bear, and I won't say any more beyond that. But, they're just photos that make you go, wow, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And, I will be clear, there's no dead animals in the book or anything, so people don't need to worry about looking at that kind of stuff. But just photos that pique your curiosity and go, what the heck is going on there?
Yeah.
I think, and then once people start reading it, then these stories really do come out even more, and the various little messages and the frustration and stuff. But then, like you said, I really wanted it to be uplifting and inspiring as well. And I think I've managed to accomplish that, particularly the feedback that I've been getting in the last 3 weeks since the book came out. It really sounds like a lot of people are finding it very uplifting and inspiring, which was really one of my goals with it.
You can order a copy of John's book or see some of his incredible photography at wildernessprints.com. John E. Marriott Wildlife Photography can also be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Remember, for a chance to win a copy of Tall Tales Long Lenses, signed by John, visit thefurbears.com/updates and sign up to get e-news and Defender Radio updates. That's the show for this week, folks. Thanks for tuning in and listening, and remember to follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Defender Radio and Instagram at Howie Michael for updates on the show, adorable dog pictures, and more. Next week is my first audio drama and the Defender Radio Family Christmas Special, so make sure you've signed up for email updates and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast app or device. I can't wait to share it with all of you. Until next time, this is Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bears, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.